with all the things that are going on, um, I felt like it was time for me to just do like another solo podcast. I've been listening to the main conversations around the war with Iran, about Ukraine, about really just all of our conflicts, but also just like our internal conflicts too. And I don't know, I just felt like I had to rant just for a second about the things that I feel like are missing from the conversation and that really simplify things, really, quite frankly. Um, First, I want to start off by saying, like, really, there's nothing to really panic about. It's that panicked energy that they want to get out of you so that you act in a way that's more erratic. They want to take away your capacity to control yourself. And I think, like, the number one thing that we can do as individuals is be in control of our actions. Easier said than done. There's actions that you know that you're in control of, things that you know that you're good at that come to you naturally, maybe now or all your life. But whatever it is where you feel like you lack self control, identify it, let your people that love you know about it, and pray on it. Um, it all starts with us. So I've been hearing like I was listening to the New York Times, and there's always this articulation whenever a government does an action where it goes like, what are the effects? What are the mechanics of this action? What's gonna happen downstream? Maybe we can make projections, maybe we can make predictions, et cetera, et cetera. And like for me, the only question that matters is this constitutional? And I was thinking about it, like we sort of outsourced deciding what's constitutional to the Supreme Court, which is a ridiculous idea. The Supreme Court is in the government. So you could think of it like this. One of the loopholes in that argument is if you're going to restrain an entity, that restraining mechanism can't be centralized in that organization. Like the Supreme Court is a part of the government. So there's always this incentive to not restrain the government's power. Like, why do you think that just because people present a certain way or wear an interesting robe, that they are actually acting as fair arbiters? And so the Constitution was written in a way where it's very plain and very clear that like we as individuals are capable of interpreting this document, and this document is up to the people to always decide. And we don't really have to go through them to decide what's constitutional. And I think if you're like an American born and raised here, um, for better or for worse, we equate like constitution to the ethics of right or wrong. Like if you've ever noticed, we love to play the morality card that, our democracy and our way of life is so moral. But it's because our documents allegedly reflect the thoughts of enlightenment that are based on morality. And when we think about the Enlightenment era in Europe, one of the main really assumptions that they made was that in order for this society to thrive, this liberal society to thrive, the people at the heads of industry, the heads of state, the heads of religion, they have to be enlightened. It was predicated on that. And the theory was the system would work in a way in which you would only have those that are most righteous, that are most selfless, that really are principled rise to the top. But what happened even during their time is that everybody has problems. Like just because you might be quote unquote enlightened at this level doesn't mean once you get this added level of responsibility, you're going to operate with that same level of integrity, even if you are a good dude, let alone the bad ones. We are constantly presented with challenges, and anyone who's lived for at least a couple days knows that you don't always get an A plus on every challenge that's presented to you. So why are we expecting that everyone that makes it to these quote unquote positions of power uh are completely restrained? And I think like when we look at ourselves, like you always get what you deserve and you always get what you can handle. So we as a community, we as a nation, we as a people, ironically, we can look at our leaders and see a reflection of ourselves. I think, ironically, like when you think about Donald Trump, for example, like all of our lives before he was president, he was like Mr. America already, like Mr. Capitalist, one of the richest people on the planet. Um, and even what he did, it was very much centered around Americanism, luxury, the capacity to play through golf. You know, obviously his hotels, his whole brand is like luxury slash fun. And the problem is when luxury slash fun is predicated in, say, selfish action and just money making, like, you know, if the reason why you're doing your businesses is primarily just to make money, then that is not the enlightened position, right? Enlightenment doesn't say an enlightenment person thinks about only money. No, enlightenment says like an enlightened person thinks about all of humanity and is able to have a broad perspective and is humble and is wise and is well read, is thoughtful, takes their time. And like, Donald Trump, for better or for worse, depending on however you feel about him, he doesn't necessarily lean into those things. But we as Americans, we have to understand the principles. That's the only thing that makes us American, is we have these documents, we have these shared ideas that every single person who's educated here learns about. You get to also articulate for yourself, like, okay, does this actually make sense or does it not make sense? Like, what is this? Okay. And as you also look through these documents, you realize, yeah, there's a lot of flaws in them too, right? And these flaws, for example, was that, I'm only three-fifths a person if another person can claim that they own me. But that was based in a lie. And I think like over time, and what we see today in our American society is that you'll have your founding thought, your founding principle, even in your life, you'll have this idea that gets you a certain length, like it gets you so far in life, but then you reach this point in your life where you're like, oh no, I have to drop this idea because if I continue to live with it, if I continue to accept it, then it's actually going to start working against me. And this idea that like just because you vote or just that automatically you are going to choose the right leader or you're going to choose a person that represents the whole of the country. And I would say for a long time, at least during our life, it has never felt like that. Like our country has pretty much been split 50-50 for a pretty long time. So on its face, that's not true. Democracy only results in a leader who represents half the people. So this like democratic republic system that we have at its core, like, is flawed. And you see those flaws play out, obviously, with these like most recent events where it's like we have this constitution, quote unquote, that says that Congress is the one that declares war. But pretty much all my life, the presidents have been declaring war. And then Congress will then vote on the back end to support it or fund it in some way. This is not, this is only tolerated. This is not justified because the idea is we, the people, should be the ones that decide who we fight. A king is always going to want to fight. Like a president's always going to want to fight because it's beneficial to the military. Like, think of it this way. When you do martial arts, you know, there's two ways to get good at martial arts. It's through drilling and sparring. And then eventually you have your competition fight or you have a real life fight, an actual altercation where you need to use these skills. And so like the government's no different, right? It wants to drill, it wants to run its practices, and it wants to spar. It wants to fight worthy opponents and without too much on the line, quote unquote. But the problem is when you think about money, when the influence of money comes into the equation of how can we make money off this situation, then you start to fix the fights, you start to fix the sparring, you start to operate in a way in which you, rather than learn from the experiences, you're only worried about making money from these experiences. So I don't care if we win or lose, if we learn anything at all. We just want to operate this war in a way that makes the most money. We want to operate this fight in the way that makes money. Like, and you see that a lot. Like, even in our real life, we have like these silly mega fights between celebrities. Most people, like, yeah, they're interested in what will, they're interested to see how the outcome will be. But ultimately, it's not about a worthy opponent. It's not really about that. It's about the spectacle of it all. And today, we certainly live in the spectacle of it all. I was listening to, like, I think Pete Hegseth talk about our military operation in Iran, and he's over here talking about how technical everything is and how precise our military force was at executing the mission. And we as American people, we should not care about those details. We should only say, was the mission constitutional? If the mission is not constitutional, then how it's executed doesn't matter. Another thing that people talk about is they'll say it's legal, and usually they talk about international law. We don't care about international law. We only care about if it's constitutional. That's it. And then from that following question, we go, if it is constitutional, then we need to change the Constitution. But it has to be bottom up, and it needs to be an individual decision. And we say, the moment the government does anything that's unconstitutional, we no longer support that government. That's the main point of the Constitution. The main ways that you support the government is listen to their laws and pay them. That's essentially the texture of their rule. Is, most of the times there's not cops at your house, but they use examples. They make examples of others to make you feel like you can be a target. But that's not really make sense numerically, right? In any city, in any place, like, the people, including these officers, including all of us are the people. We outnumber, the leaders of the state a bajillion to one. So it is almost disrespectful to be fearful of them when you have this massive advantage on them. And on top of that, we are family. We're friends with people that are in these positions, and we can talk to them. Like, this isn't the way. This isn't constitutional. And the idea behind the Constitution is that it's a productive way to organize a society. So another way of saying this is immoral and it's unproductive. So when we, like, kill people, it's not like to our benefit. Like, if I had a neighbor that I didn't like, it is not in my benefit to kill them. They have family. There's this thing that what happens with hubris is you're like, I was powerful enough to hurt this person. So everyone that knows them must be weaker. And they won't retaliate against me. But it's like, does that even make sense? Like, if there were even no police, do you really think you could just walk around and kill a person with no consequence? No matter who the person is. Like, you might think to yourself, oh, I'm not going to get caught. But anyone who's lived a life for a while knows that random shit happens. And the things that happens in your life are proportional to the negative things that you do, think, and say. And once we really understand that correlation and accept that correlation in our life, the enlightened thinkers thought this. It's like, enlightened folks also will be rewarded for their enlightenment if the objective stays the same. And I think then Thomas Jefferson came and said, all of this is predicated on God. We have to use God as our North Star, as what we're aiming towards, if you will. Godliness. So then we can also say, even if it's not if it is constitutional, then our next question is, would God like this? And what'll happen is like you'll see our leaders, they present very well, they present religious, but yet all day they kill people. Boom, 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 boom. Kill this guy, kill that guy, kill this guy, kill that guy. Um, many of our faiths have the idea of the conqueror, the conquering king who is in alignment with God or whatever. But you know, if you were to even read like any spiritual text, it all talks about selflessness, turning the other cheek. It also talks about how governments everywhere prop up detrimental activity because detrimental activity is what generally generates money for them. That's what we see today. It's like the biggest companies. So if you're a big company, you pay more in taxes, so you make the government stronger. So those companies are built around addiction. Sometimes we don't even recognize how much shopping is really an addiction. And what I mean by an addiction is something that you do thinking that it'll make you happier because you've done it. So pharmaceutical companies, tech companies, oil companies, car companies, they all provide all these services and activities that we in the West, like we relish and we think that's what makes us advanced. But these are all just addictions. And these addictions ultimately are binding us to this future that will never allow us to be free. And I always ask, it's funny, one of my like main gurus, basically Swami Karunananda at Yogaville, she was like, spiritual life is freedom. It's about freedom. Like God brings freedom. Like, not even just Thomas Jefferson, but all the founders of the American enterprise in this New World Order is that like democracy, the reason why we like democracy, the reason why we have a free capitalist or free market society is because of freedom. And with freedom, maybe it's not easy to articulate, but freedom manifests as like our dreams coming true. Like we don't know how to put our finger on it, but freedom somehow led to airplanes and phones and all this technology that we have. Freedom somehow led to us living in a multicultural society. Freedom somehow let us, quote unquote, get to the moon um, or all the benefits that Americans or the Western world seems to have. We feel like it's downstream of freedom. But to be very direct, it was freedom from government. Because government seems to be the largest force that counteracts God. It counteracts freedom itself. So I've been saying Constitution, but really the Declaration of Independence as well. And just the spirit of these documents, if they were applied at their purest principle or at a more pure principle that we can live in and exist in today, it's like the reason why we as the people always have to be big daddy in the room is because government's nature is to counteract God. And it does it in so many minute little ways that it's even hard to put your finger on. But this war is a great example of it. Like, it's just like we were unprovoked. Trump said he had a feeling. Israel said they had a feeling. These guys said, like, intelligence is just a feeling. Like, you can walk, like, any of us have had a conversation with someone. We'll walk into the conversation assuming they want to talk about something. And then right then they're like, no, like, what are you talking about? They have a whole different thing they want to talk about. Like, intelligence does not predict the future. Like, if you play chess against me 100 times, that does not mean you can say, well, I have intelligence that Quentin's first 5 moves are going to be rook here, pawn here, queen here. No, like we're human beings. We don't operate that way. Like we often are unpredictable. And this faith in our intellect and our analytical capacity sort of drives like our tech industry as well. But it's sort of like this idea that we can be, if we can reduce life to numbers, take the emotions out of things, then we can become masters of the universe. But if we don't account for morality in our calculations and our actions, we will always move further and further away from the goal. I've said this kind of more so in private or every now and then, but it's like, think about the tobacco industry in the Americas, you know, or just not even just the tobacco industry, but just the whole founding of the Americas is a couple countries develop some pretty cool like technology, some big ships, and they figure out how to sail across the ocean. And these countries had been for really forever in conflicts with each other, large or small. And so these different countries come to this place, and their kings are concerned about defending themselves. And the main way that they defend themselves is that they raise armies. And the main way that you raise armies is through money, paying people. So they come to the Americas and they immediately think, how do we make money off of this new discovery? And they come up with this idea called cash crops. And they use cash crops, which are crops that don't have any nutritional value. They're not beneficial nutritional, but people want them. They're typically addictive, or they have a benefit to life, quote unquote benefit to life, that people get addicted to. So it's not a substance, but it's more so a service or a product that you can use that you get addicted to. And you didn't even know you were addicted to it because it just seems so obvious that it's necessary to use. Our common example is the phone, but they had many things over years. So they come to the stage and they say, well, in order to make money off of these cash crops, we have to find labor that's not from our people that'll tend to this. We actually have to get people to do the work for us in order for us to make money from the cash crop. And first, I want to say right there was the first lie. Like in I'm not going to blame it on the people, but in the kings and the explorers' hearts, they genuinely believed in order to make the most money, you have to use force. You can't negotiate. You can't just trade, because they're from a space where for thousands of years that was how they navigated. And then they came over here, and the natives were like, well, um, we'll just trade with you. But they saw that this trade and this generosity was almost like, hey, look at all this wealth they have for us to just take through our favorite tool, force. And remember, this was pre-enlightenment. This is why this is so important. Our roots are pre-enlightenment. But this is the way it was in Europe. And so when this ended up happening, it sort of set us on this track of saying, hey, look, we need to use force. We as in this government entity, has to use force, has to use addiction, has to use money as a way to maintain safety for themselves. We hear this all the time where it's like, it's a dangerous world out there. If we don't attack these countries first, if we don't preemptively strike, then they'll hurt us. If we don't spend so much money, if we don't have these budget packages passed, and we don't have all this military funding, if we don't print this money, then we're in trouble. And you see how they have their faith in force. Their faith is in money. And anybody who knows the native story is that the natives were much more of a spiritual people. And ironically, they had the wealth. Even in Africa, same thing. These places were seen as very wealthy places where there's all these quote unquote untapped resources by the kings and the queens in Europe, that they had to go there and explore. And they thought the only way, there's no way anybody would just give it to us. We have to take it by force. And pre-enlightenment, that force was pretty brutal. Like, we heard about the Spanish conquest, essentially, from Mexico, Mexico, previous Mexico down, from South America, from Argentina, Chile up. This just conquer strategy, um, where a lot of the stuff that they were trying to take by force could have just been given to them for free. And I think that when you think that logic through, it's maintains today in which like the system where we live now, we have this highly interesting, this highly intricate technological industry and society that kind of like is the foundation of everything, right? Like our right now, like back in the day, your tool might have been a plow or a shovel, and now our tool, and then it went from that to the Industrial Revolution where it might have been some sort of machine, and now it's the computer. You know, you go to a cafe, everybody's working on a computer. So we say to ourselves, okay, we have all this luxury from these products, but these products were generated just to make cash. And the reason why I use this framing rather than say produce like support yourself, it's like, no, your biggest bill is your tax, right? Like, it goes like they say, like, what do they say? Like, your house should be 30% of your income. If you're buying a house in this country, you're probably in like a six-figure range. In that range, your tax rate is about 30%. So you have to operate off of an even smaller amount, like a much, much, much smaller amount of from anything, and then take 30% of that just to like have a shelter for yourself. And when I look at this system that was created, it's like, how is this happy? Like, how is this life? Like, how is it freedom when, the very first person that you have to pay is the government? Like it's almost like if they were in your door, like if you were just to wake up in the morning and it's like you got your paycheck and you had to immediately go to the government office and pay them. And then you can take what's left of that and give that to your wife, give that to your kids, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's more egregious, especially if you're from like a more country area where it's like, if you're in the city, see the government more and you think that they do more for you. But like the further away you are, where it's like you're out there on it, where there's not even a police station within several hours, like it just feels like an insult. And I think what really the main point I'm trying to get at is like we've lost sight, we as in the American people over generations of A, the Constitution, but B, the backing of the Constitution, which is godliness. And you might not understand what God wants, but here's like a couple of things to play with. Um, when we focus on the minute things, like what this person said to me, what this person might have done to me. If you were just like a higher perspective, like if you were to zoom out of your life and zoom out and zoom out and zoom out and zoom out and just look at the earth as a whole, to like your point of view is you could see the whole earth. Here's watching the earth. I think from that point of view, would you want things on earth to just destroy other things on earth? Would you want things on earth to just carve up surfaces and make them uninhabitable? No. Like, here's this thing where it's like the intellect will come in and say, well, depending on the circumstance in which there's this and there's that and there's this and there's that. It's like, no. Like, if you were a mother looking at your children, would you say to your children, the way that I want you to settle your disputes is by killing one another? No. So why are we so confident in destroying creation? Like, you can tell what type of tree this is by its fruit, and the fruit is always death and destruction. Death and destruction. They come to the Americas and they cause death and destruction. Then, as soon as the Americas are formed, we have very short time. Well, while the Americas are formed in the very beginning years, there's slavery that is death and destruction. Then, after that, there's a civil war, which leads to death and destruction. And then, right after that, you have American expansionism, which continued with like the Indian Wars and the Native American wars and the broken treaties and all that stuff, which led to death and destruction. Then pretty much soon after that happened, you had more repression in the, in the southern states with like racial things, but then also in the north, you had all the immigrants coming and there's a lot of repression there. And you built these massive cities that were extremely toxic with these factories that led to death and destruction. And I'm saying destruction as in destruction of the earth, destruction of what people have built and destruction of the natural surfaces of the earth. Then you have World War One, death and destruction. Then there's the Great Depression, death and destruction. Then you have World War II, death and destruction. And like I can already, I'll pause right here where it's like someone might say, well, this could have this is the whole. No, not the whole. No, these were a certain group of individuals that decided to take these actions that led to all this death and destruction for so many other people. It wasn't always like this, and not all people had the same thought process as the warring Europeans. Not no beef with them, but that's just a fact. And nobody thought and meditated on destruction like them and created all these weapons. Like they call it advanced. It's not advanced to meditate on harming others. So then after that, you have World War II. Then right after that, you have, what is it, the Korean War and the Vietnam War, which had a draft, which led to a lot of death and destruction. Then you have sort of like the Cold War beefs, and then you have the Central American and I'm just talking about America, but after World War II, World War One, and definitely World War II, we started to take on Britain's foreign policy, which was always death and destruction for sure, in order to maintain its empire. Britain, France, these countries specialized in it for a long time. But it's like this reliance on death and destruction, and that is their main way to feel safe. Like America will often say this, we feel safer when we attack and kill others. When we're proactively going out into these spaces, we feel safer. And it's a false sense of safety. You should just feel safe. You don't have to act a certain way to feel safe. Like when it's like they always say this, like the most dangerous man is a fearful man because he'll do anything. And it's like they've just allowed fear to run their society for so long. The Enlightenment didn't make its way perpetually throughout the entire society, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And there's this same habit of using force and death and destruction as a main way to get your means. But at the same time, the generals, they've realized that there's all this blowback, there's all these repercussions, there's all these consequences to acting that way. But like I said, anyone who's lived a while knows that when internally there's consequences to your actions. They come in many, many ways, not always in the way that you think it's going to come. So ultimately, in order for us, the Americans, to really make a change this time and hold our government according to the Constitution and essentially aim up towards godliness as a people, we have to act right now. Like, you have to act at the transitions. They want to go this way into the war. Well, let's push them a little bit deeper into it and get off balance and rest on top. You use their weight against them. You go with their flow. So what I'm getting at is like, there's a lot of folks out here that want to be, you feel the times are turning and you're saying to yourself, okay, my best attitude is to be like, to fight this, to push against this in this way. There's nothing to push against. All we have to do is act right within ourselves. So if you're like, I'll put it this way. If you haven't worked out or done something healthy or ate something healthy or done the right or helped out a friend or did some community service, you don't need to go to a protest because you're not creating the conditions. You're not creating really the conditions for a real revolution. A real revolution starts when each individual stops doing things out of money, out of want, out of discontent. It has to be a revolution in the attitude, the approach to life, where you don't have to use force. We use friendliness. You get much more from a friend. If I were to try to enslave my homie, he wouldn't do anything for me. But when you're good to your people, when you're good to your wife, when you're good to your neighbors, like they treat you well, when you're respectful towards them, when you care about them, when you think good thoughts towards them, when you want them to succeed. Yeah, if you guys have an altercation in that moment, you might have to be a little bit flexible in the way that you think about them. But you shouldn't just be brooding on them all day, all night. That's not healthy. It's counterproductive. That's not freedom. That's not happiness. I see so often like people are like so hateful towards Trump supporters or people who voted for Trump or people who might be conservative today. That is counterproductive to your goal. We are all brothers and sisters. This is true. If you keep down here in this like minimalist narrow vision of the world, then you are the force that's perpetuating that with which you don't like. It's like I look at it this way. It's like when you just by you going really hard in one direction, you create opposition, equal and opposite opposition. And that's why like I always emphasize like being in the middle, being like, hey, that happened. Okay, how are we going to respond to that? Rather than having all this animosity and frustration. Like I can beat you in chess and I can lose to you in chess and have a whole bunch of fun. And this is really chess. And I think the main things that I want to emphasize is in chess, in fighting, and these sort of analogies that I've been using, you're always keeping your mind on the objective. The objective is freedom. And real freedom cannot come through selfishness. It can't come through prioritizing money. It can't. So we as a society, we have to get out of also, real freedom doesn't come through believing that someone else can give you your freedom. Freedom is self-emanating. It's a choice. It's a decision to live with mastery and have control over your actions. That's freedom. And with that control, with that capacity, you're only using it to serve others. This is the way. And unless like Americans, a large critical mass of Americans start to internalize this, then it doesn't matter who's in power because we'll still vote along these same lines of using death and destruction, of using force preemptively, force through fear, or using force because you are fearful. All of these is a recipe for disaster, and it only replicates itself over and over and over again. What our government is doing and what has been doing for so long is completely ungodly and unconstitutional. And everybody who's an American can either identify with one of those two things. You don't believe in God, you believe in the universe, and you believe in the betterment of humanity. So you can tell if a person thinks that way based on how they speak about others and how they speak about themselves. So the number one thing that we can do that's most practical, any thought that you have about yourself that is negative, any thought that you have about another person that is negative, actively in your own mind think the opposite thought. That's it. So if you think about yourself and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, I don't like that. I don't like that scar on my face. Think I like that scar on my face. If you think, oh, I hate Donald Trump. I hate Donald Trump and he's such a monster. Think I love Donald Trump. Hate wants hate. It's almost like this. It's like you ever meet like Justin Bieber's a great example of this, or these people that come along like Tom Brady and even now like the Eagles quarterback where it's like Drake, some people come along and they're almost like the culmination of our collective imagination imagining a person. And it's like now this person's here and born. Where it's like all the in things happen at once and there's this one person that personifies it. And I think that's what it's like for all of life. As long as we have all this negativity and all this hate and all these justifications to harm others in our own mind, it'll always create people to execute that, create specialists in that, right? We are responsible for our evolution. So, it's ironic too about what I even said about Donald Trump. Is like the people that get closest to Donald Trump are the people that flatter him, ironically. There's this thing that the devil uses. He uses flattery to inflate people, to make you feel like, you know what, I am doing the right thing, to overpower that voice within, that conscience within that's telling them, no, this is wrong. So you think positive thoughts and you respond positively. In a fight, if you're in a fight, for example, you shouldn't think, I'm going to lose the fight. 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 Like, that's going to make you so stressed. You're going to lose the fight and you're also not going to fight well, which also causes you to lose the fight. But if the whole time you're in this altercation and you think, I'm going to win this, no matter what position I'm in, I can handle it, I can get out of it, and I can stand on top. I was not born to be conquered. I was not born to bow. I was born to conquer. It's like they think that we're weaklings, that because we don't resist their moves, that somehow we are complacent. And that's not true at all. Our entire life, our entire freedom, it's a affront, really. It's a counter to their downpression. So when they start to transition this way, where they want to exert more resources and use more force across the world, and they want to become more powerful, then our counter to that is we become more internally powerful. We become more internally responsible for our actions. We don't even have to do anything really in the external world, like violently. All we have to do is be masters of ourselves and say, I love myself enough to know that I will not contribute to something that harms others, because when I contribute to things that harm others, I end up harming myself. I am a master of my actions. I'm responsible for my income. And if I don't want to delegate my income to resources that are harming to myself or others, then I'm not going to, because my faith is not in some rule written somewhere. My faith rests in something higher. I see behind the veil, behind this little play society, and I see that there's something controlling everything. So my objective is to operate in accordance with that. There's no need to hate each other. We can all play together. We can spar with each other. That's okay. But we can agree on rules. We really can. There's just like a couple of us in a room. We could all decide on like, I don't want to do that. Let's do this. Okay, I won't. All right, let's agree to disagree. Let's leave that for later. Let's observe that. Let's research that. Let's look into it. Let's see what happens. Like we can find a way to live with each other in harmony. Ironically, America is the best example of that. So many of us from so many different places are able to live together in harmony because we have so much that we share. So instead of supporting this force that we can see through history, goes from place to place to place around the world and uses death and destruction as a means to protect the ruling class, we don't have to participate in that. As we withdraw from that system gets weaker on its own. There's no need to use force. Time passes. No one can stop that. People that once used death and destruction as a means to get around, they're going to pass away. While they're passing and losing strength, we are using our resources to embolden that future that we want to see. a future in which we love the land, where we love one another, and where we love ourselves. I'll leave you with this. It's okay to warn a person. It's okay to be blunt. Hey, look, man, you crossed my boundary here. I really like you. I really wish the best for you. I don't want to see you suffer at all. But since you crossed this boundary, I'm not going to operate with you in the same way that I was before. And I think for me with the government, it's clear now through the Iran war for sure, but the Israeli quote unquote war in Gaza, the Ukraine war, COVID, and all of the deception around that and death around that. The previous quote unquote war on terrorism, which magically went away when the Ukraine war started. The wars in Central America that also led to the crack epidemic in the Americas and the drug epidemic in the Americas, the wars in Europe, the war that we call imperialism in Africa, but these were all wars. The imperialist system was a war on Africa. The war with China, the war in India to conquer those places. There's a couple places left that haven't been truly carved up. That is Iran, the Persian Empire. That is mainland China, which also includes Tibet, and Russia. These are the only places left that haven't been carved up by the Western European powers. Britain lives in this deep sense of insecurity, DC, Paris, because they know what they've done. But I think right now, if we as the American people say, hey, look, we'll let bygones be bygones, we want to operate through love and accountability and respect. We don't want anything crazy or anything harmful. We just want a new direction, a new way to point our resources. Like when you move the ship of the boat to change direction, you don't have to kill, the whole crew in order to do it. So I believe in persuasion. I believe in softness and kindness. I believe in God. And with that, we will use those tools to usher in a new era of prosperity. So, anyways, thank you for joining me and just hearing me rant for a little bit, trying to use a little bit of truth and love to counter all this deception and animosity that's trying to be fomented against us. But the only way to really counter is not to use their tools against them. You have to use self control and self mastery to really, really change the world. I love you. Peace.